So thank you, Kate. As she mentioned, my name is Stephanie Lin. I'm from NSTXL. NSTXL stands for the National Security Technology Accelerator. And I've got all my colleagues here on the front couch here, so feel free to say hello when you get a chance. We help the government with rapid prototyping needs. Through the use of OT vehicles, which means faster acquisition in support of warfighter needs. So I am here today to talk to you about microelectronics. I was asked to give a brief on why microelectronics are important. I can finish this brief in like 2 seconds and just tell you it's because it's everywhere, right? And then we're done. But I did think about it a little bit, so I figured, let me put a little meat on the bones. Oh, okay. I got to give myself some visual. Okay. So I decided to ask technology to help me answer this question. So the assignment, why is microelectronics important? I went to ChatGPT and I asked them, okay, well, you guys tell me, technology, maybe let's see how they explain themselves. And I know the screen's a little small. I wasn't expecting a small display, but I'll see what I can read from that. I'll walk around a little bit. Oh. So you're not meant to read that text, but really what it's meant to show is, hey, look, there's a lot of reasons why this is important. But actually, if you could see it, what it says is it's a mix of kind of like a value proposition. It'll say, miniaturization, right? You can make things smaller through it. It's high performance and speed, energy efficiency, and then it'll jump to, you can use it in automation and AI. You can use it in medical innovation, consumer electronics, and of course, aerospace and defense. So they got a mix of application and a value prop, which is interesting. I was just curious to see how ChatGPT would answer that question. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I guess the animations are interesting. Okay. So they're everywhere, right? We've come to the same conclusion. So that was no surprise. So what's the big deal with this? Well, they're small. They're super tiny. What does that mean? That picture, if you can see that on the left, your left, that is about 80,000 nanometers. That is the width of a hair. So when we're talking about, usually when we talk microelectronics, we're talking transistors. They are pretty much the foundational technology that make up just about everything. So how small is a transistor? We're talking about single-digit nanometers. It can go into double digits and triple digit, 100. You could talk about it 28 nanometer, 12 nanometer. But a lot of the leading edge we're talking about right now is 2, 3, 1.8, all that kind of stuff. And all those numbers mean different things once you peel back the layers of the onion. So if you can see that width, that little dot, if you can see that circle, which most of you probably can't see, that's actually representative of 300 nanometers. So if you look at 2, that's even smaller than that. It's probably smaller than the pixel on the screen. So what does that mean? If it's really small, it's got to be really complex. All the machinery, all the supply chain, everything that surrounds that thing, it needs a lot of precision, right? Which also means it's very expensive. So with how complicated this ecosystem is, you can imagine that all of the industry that exists to support it exists around the globe, right? And so we are very dependent on other countries to make the things that are in your cell phones, to make the things that are on planes, to make everything that you see around us that requires electronics. An SIA report said that by 2030, about 83% of the manufacturing piece would reside in Asia, 83. And that's not even getting into the details of, the technology that's the size of what fits in your phone versus what goes in an automobile. They are all different types of technologies, and there is a different supply chain for each one of them. So that obviously adds to the complexity. And because there's so much that goes into that, there's a very high barrier to entry for commercial industry. And of course, that further exacerbates things. So of course, when we see, supply chain, global interdependency, that becomes a challenge when we're talking the defense space, right? So the internet never disappoints. The other element to this is workforce. So of course, with so many complicated elements to microelectronics and everything it takes to make everything in your devices run, I decided to look into, okay, well, what are some of the workforce challenges that we are seeing? I had actually read a story, Melinda French Gates. I think we all have heard about her, right? Microsoft. She had a really interesting story about how she ended up in Microsoft. And if you folks don't know, so she was interning at IBM back in the day, and one of her managers actually asked, as she was about getting ready to transition out of her internship into a full-time position, one of her managers asked, "Are you ready to take the job?" Meaning at Intel, or at IBM. "Are you ready to transition over?" She says, "Yeah, I think I'm ready to go ahead and take that job." And her manager said, "Don't do it." She said, "What other positions are you looking at?" And she had mentioned Microsoft. At that time, Microsoft was a little baby, right? It was a startup. And her manager said, "If you have the opportunity, go ahead and take that Microsoft job." So she took the advice of her manager. IBM themselves told her to go pursue a role somewhere else, and that's how she ended up where she ended up. And so obviously it was a really good decision for her. So I thought, okay, microelectronics world, what are people saying on the internet? How are the folks on the ground, how are the students nowadays really making the decisions on where they want to go next and how where they want to be when they grow up, kind of thing. So I went to Reddit, of course, a reliable source of information. So basically I found an individual. This post was about 28 days ago now, so it's fairly recent. And he asked a pretty normal question like, "Hey, I'm thinking about going into semiconductors. Is it a good idea? Is it a good job? Does it pay well? How's the culture, the environment?" And then the first response right after this says, "Just apply, you nerd." And I thought, you know what? That's really fun because, as it turns out, we've got a diminishing workforce in the tech field, right? I don't think that's necessarily a surprise to anybody, but the semiconductor space is certainly a part of that. I think it was estimated in SIA report about 3.85 million jobs expected by 2030. About 1.4 million of those will not go filled. That is over a third. That is a lot. So for semiconductors specifically, right, we're looking at about 460,000 of that 3.85. And of those, about 67,000 will not be filled. So as you can imagine, if we're trying to bring this stuff onshore, we're trying to help embolden and strengthen domestic manufacturing, that is going to be a problem. So what about DoD? There was a group that was established called the the Defense Microelectronics Cross-Functional Team, the DMCFT. They put out a microelectronics vision document. I think it was 2022. So you guys can find this online. But basically in it, they said microelectronics are everywhere. They're in every single system, just about. So there's huge impacts if we cannot support our warfighter from a semiconductor standpoint, if we do not have domestic capability that can support. So the other challenge that DoD faces is that DoD systems and programs account for just under 1% of the global semiconductor output, just 1%. And obviously that does not drive a lot of influence in that industry. So what do we do, right? If we ever come to a point where we're looking at potential compromise, we're not going to have a lot of say in the community. And of course, that puts at risk our global superiority. Now, imagine that there was an ecosystem that can help address some of this. So in 2023, DoD established 8 hubs across the United States. And this is where I start talking about where our role as NSTXL comes in and how we're supporting the warfighter. So obviously you hear a lot of messaging surrounding rapid prototyping, about forward ops, about enabling the warfighter, right? Readiness. Through other transaction authorities, OTAs, right, we enable that. We enable Microelectronics Commons through these 8 hubs that you see there to be able to provide rapid prototyping and innovation to the DoD. So right now, we've got the 8 hubs, and we've got 34 funded projects going through those hubs to exercise this ecosystem. There are 6 technology focus areas. They are 5G, 6G, AI, commercial leap ahead, EW, quantum, and secure edge. So to help bridge some of the valley of death topics that we've been hearing about, DoD is intentionally trying to drive some of the semiconductor microelectronics innovations specifically towards those application spaces. So with that, thank you so much. I hope you have a better appreciation for the significance of semiconductors and microelectronics for defense.
All right, thank you so much. Our next panel is